What's up guys, my name is Ninja Noodle Nick, and with the next 2 chapters of Deltarune teetering on the edge of being released, I feel like there was no better time than now to give some last minute predictions regarding the game's future, more specifically predicting things to come in the near future. It's really one major thing that I will be focusing on today, and it was probably in the title knowing me, and it sort of snowballs into other parts of the lore, which involve various smaller predictions. It will all make sense when I get there, but they are all very important things to me, and I'm excited to delve into each and every one of them. I'm hesitant to attempt to predict anything beyond what we will be receiving in the next drop. Hell, I'm hesitant to even touch on Chapter 4 due to us having so little info on anything that isn't the direct next installment. Trying to predict too much beyond what we actually know and have concrete answers and details on results in a video that is nothing more than pure speculation. Well, I don't mind some level of speculation, because let's be real, what Deltarune Theory doesn't have one? I'm pretty sure it's like mandatory in the laws of creating a Deltarune Theory to speculate a little bit. It's just mandatory, like you have to do it. But I prefer my theories to have some standing things that we actually do know with great certainty. I want to build off the themes of the game, details we've learned from the game itself, the Spamton sweepstakes, and even things from the various newsletters and updates Toby's been providing, rather than making completely wild guesses. As alluded to a second ago, this theory video, like the ones that came before it, will still have speculation, but I will make a solid effort to keep it grounded as I dive into today's topic. You can let me know if I succeeded in the comments below. If you enjoy the video or even agree with anything that I had to say, why don't you consider subscribing? It helps me out a ton, and you can always change your mind anytime you like. Now it's time to move on to the main topic of the video. It's secret boss time. Yeah. I will be the first one to admit this. My favorite aspect of Deltarune so far is undoubtedly the secret bosses. Sure, it's probably a fairly common take, but it's an honest one for me that you can count on. They stand out as some of the most compelling characters in the game and easily more intriguing than the main bosses. At least in my opinion. They are fan favorite characters for a reason after all, and when you look at Jevil and Spamton, our current secret bosses, you can see how they share certain key elements that might help guide us toward understanding our next secret boss and seeing what it might entail. And that is the topic of today's video. Now it's really hard to say if these things are patterns when our sample size is 2, but the way we can determine if they will repeat is by seeing if said patterns the secret bosses have relate to the themes of the game, or even if they relate to the protagonist in any way at all. If either are true or they both are, then we can assume that the secret boss of Chapter 3, and maybe the remaining of them, will share these things in common, and we can form a more clear vision of what the secret boss of Chapter 3 is most likely going to look like, and we can make our predictions more accurate. Now, it is important to note that there will be a secret boss in Chapter 3. As Sham says, the next one might be impossible to beat without the Shadow Mantle. Now, I won't bore you with the things that definitely don't matter, like the items of secret bosses being things they wear or parts of their body, or anything like that, as I want to focus on things that I'm 100% confident will repeat. Starting with the most common similarity. I believe the most popular and well-known similarity that everyone brings up when discussing the nature of the secret bosses is their existence in the light world as discarded and unwanted objects. In the light world, Jevil takes the form of a Joker card, a card usually discarded in most games, often left out entirely because it doesn't serve a key function. It is considered an extra, something not required to play most games. In many cases, it's simply surplus, taking up space without offering anything necessary. On the off chance it is included, the role is often vague and not crucial to the outcome. A wild card, if anything, much like Jevil's character. It's used only in very specific instances or by house rules that don't apply to the majority of games. Because it's neither essential nor commonly used, the Joker card is often tossed aside, making it a largely forgotten piece of the deck. Nothing more than an afterthought that doesn't shape the game's flow at all. Spamton, on the other hand, takes the shape of spam mail in the light world. Spam mail is typically discarded because it serves zero purpose. It's literally nothing more than an unwanted intrusion that clutters inboxes with irrelevant content, whether it's promotional offers, scams, or random adverts. Most people don't even bother to open them, that's how irrelevant they are, quickly deleting or marking them as junk with little thought. Even when spam isn't trashed right away, it is filtered through a separate folder, where it accumulates unnoticed. It's just here to create noise, taking up space and distracting from important and more noteworthy messages, with no value to offer. Spam is something people actively avoid and discard, yet it continues to flood inboxes. It's the equivalent to junk, always unwanted, always discarded. Both the Joker card and spam mail share the same characteristic of things that are regularly discarded and unwanted by those around them. They don't fit into the world around them and are often overlooked, but despite that, they keep showing up, lingering in the background. Now, at first, you might question how this relates to the game at all, its characters or its themes, and that's because the stuff important to this discussion is optional content you can easily miss and has to do with our protagonist, Chris. I'm unsure how well known or common this interpretation is, but Chris has shown evidence of feeling unwanted or out of place, which we can extrapolate from the dialogue with Torio and the book from the library. Torio mentions how Chris used to ask when their horns would come in, and so Torio bought them a headband with red horns on it. And in the library, when you interact with the book upstairs, Chris quickly closes it after seeing a picture of humans. Both of these in their own way highlight the fact that Chris most likely doesn't like to be reminded by the fact they are human and just want to fit in with the monsters in town. They feel out of place in hometown. They feel unwanted. This might not be the case in the present, or at the least in chapter 2, but it was a feeling Chris has had in the past, at least based on what we know. But it wouldn't surprise me if they still feel this way because Chris does show signs of depression. Their side of the bedroom demonstrates that to great effect. Their side of the bedroom reflects no interest, no drive, no passion, no motivation, or activities that motivate them. Even the color palette and descriptions are gray and depressing. The only thing of any interest in the only space that belongs to just Chris, is a cage where they lock their soul up in the night. Chris is an empty shell, or feels like they are. It doesn't help that before the events of the story, they are getting bullied by Susie, who seems to hate humans. They feel out of place and unwanted in a town full of monsters that do not seem to understand them. Especially Torio, unfortunately, who is very protective over Chris, which I think Chris resents, which plays into why they might have created the Dark World at the end of chapter 2, so that Torio can see how capable they are of taking care of themselves. Anyhow, Azrael's side of the bedroom exists to contrast Chris's, showing us that he's very accomplished and happy, living a great life without Chris, which may be partially causing or exasperating Chris's problems. To Chris, Azrael is an example of aspiration to happiness and normality, which is the key here, that Chris lacks. As we stated before, Chris is the only human in town, and the only human in their family. It's very evident Torio and Asgore love Chris and treat them like they are family, and not an outsider. But the mere existence of their differences might be enough to make Chris feel like that knockoff controller that hides under their brother's bed, and makes them feel unwanted. Unwanted, huh? That sounds just like what the secret bosses are. Not to mention, Chris is very obviously supposed to be a parallel to Kara. Not saying they are literally Kara in the Deltarune universe, but I feel like the similarities are there. They look alike, they both are obsessed with chocolate, and both love to pull pranks. But on top of all of that, Kara, above all else, despised humans. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say that Chris might too. Maybe not to the extent that Kara did, but I still think it's a possibility. Since Chris is the protagonist, their internal struggles will manifest in the themes of the game, and it manifests in Jevil and Spamton, who are both discarded items, but also king in pretty much the entirety of the first Dark World, since Sean mentions that the Lightners cast them away to that prison, and King says the Lightners will pay for abandoning them. The prison being the old unused abandoned classroom, which probably belonged to Gerson, most likely. But this theme of being abandoned and discarded isn't just present there. It's present with Susie. There's a line in Castletown which alludes to her not having a bed, which might highlight a point of her parents not caring for her at all. There is another line that mentions how Susie slept in her hideout, so it's basically a home, which could even highlight that Susie might not even have a place to live in hometown. She was just tossed away to the wayside, discarded and unwanted. So this theme is present in things outside of Chris, even in other main characters, like Susie. And it's even relevant in Rouse, how he was waiting for Chris and Susie for so long, alone, not having any subjects, Kind of sounds like himself was created and then discarded at some point. But I won't go too much more in depth on that, because I want to move on to other things the secret bosses have in common that connects to the themes of the game and Chris and the other main characters. And that is, of course, being freedom. Jevil and Spamton have knowledge they probably shouldn't have, and have different opinions on the idea of freedom. In Jevil's dialogue, he states, Jevil has forbidden knowledge of the world. He knows what his existence truly is. He's aware of that fact that he's in a game. And that means, at least to him, he's allowed to do whatever he wants, because none of it is real, none of it matters, right? This is the freedom he believes that he's found. And because he's the only one aware of this, he believes that he's the only one free, despite him being in a literal cage, a literal prison. We know that this is what most likely happened to Jevil because of what Sham says. Given that last line, we can assume that this person Jevil met was Gaster, since Sham literally quotes him. Jevil believes he's free, but he isn't really. He's lost his only friend and is locked inside a cage, by himself for so long that he even started to feel lonely. Like, what's the point of freedom if you are just bored all the time? Jevil lost everything in the pursuit of a pure delusion. Spamton, much like Jevil, has forbidden knowledge of their world and the truth of their reality. And we actually know Spamton has seen the world above his, based on his dialogue. I used to be nothing but the email guy. Now I'm the it burns, oh stop, help me, it burns guy. I have this written in the script, and oh my god, I love Spamton. But anyways, which might not seem like it confirms anything, but this text is different in the Japanese translation, which I'll just have on screen because I am not gonna even attempt to try to speak Japanese. I'm not doing it. But it translates to, in the past, I was just in charge of sending emails. Now I'm in charge of the, wait, it's too bright, my eyes hurt. Meaning Spamton saw some sort of light that was blinding enough to hurt his eyes. But we don't know what the heaven Spamton refers to is. We can infer that he tried to look into it before, and that this is what caused his eyes to burn. The Snowgrave route, or Weird route, or whatever you want to call it, seems to support this. As when Chris calls for help against Spamton Neo, he tells Chris, so I think Spamton experienced this blinding light via the Shadow Crystal, since the Shadow Crystal showed the light world, which Spamton believes is heaven since it exists above his reality. Then thought he saw the Lightner Habstablook, creating the Neo body but abandoned it, and then Spamton became obsessed with this and then tried everything to get it. A Lightner created the Neo body, and the Darkeners see the Lightners as gods. So Spamton probably just assumed that this was his ticket to freedom. The body was made by a god, so surely he could use it to pierce heaven, right? By the way, we know this was the case that a Lightner created the Neo body based on what Swatch says after you beat Spamton, which should appear on screen right now. Spamton learned of his true nature of the world, most likely again, through Gaster, and actually saw heaven and was determined to reach it. Jevil thought he was already free, but wasn't. While Spamton knew he wasn't free and tried to break the cycle of failure. But still, at the end of the day, like he says himself, he was still nothing more than a simple puppet. Spamton didn't just want to be doomed to bend to heaven's will, so he sought to change that, and still failed, unfortunately. Spamton knows what he has is not freedom, but he desperately yearns for it. Spamton doesn't want to believe that his fate is decided. His one goal in life was to become a big shot, and it seems like it's always just out of grasp for him. Even when he finally got what he had always wanted in life, at the end of the day, it still disappeared. It still slipped right through the cracks of his fingers. So freedom is another thing that recurs within the Secret Bosses, which naturally connects back to Chris. Probably more so than the discarded theme. There is a specific reason that Chris freaks out after the battle with Spamton Neo. Spamton is like a reflection to Chris, and Chris knows that very well, and sees themselves in Spamton. Spamton obviously isn't free. He's lost control over his life. His speech patterns are glitched out, his thoughts are erratic. He couldn't control himself, his thoughts, or even controls what he says. A puppet on strings, nothing more, nothing less. That's why he tries to become Spamton Neo, because that new body gives him the slightest bit of hope of being free. Now this is very similar to Chris. They themselves are a puppet that we control and bend to our will. We have so much freedom, in fact, that we can literally force Chris to manipulate their childhood best friend into committing cold-blooded murder. Chris definitely has more control over Spamton though, which is evident by the fact that we've literally seen them remove us from their body at the end of both current chapters. But even then, it looks like they really struggled to move around without us. I wouldn't be surprised if they are forced to be stuck with us, in a sense where they can't survive without us. I mean, they literally walk like a zombie, so it wouldn't surprise me. So, with that being said, Chris doesn't have control over their life or who they want to be. This is why they are so interested in what Spamton has to say, because this might be able to lead them directly to their freedom, assuming this is what they want. It's a bit weird that Chris hasn't gone to others for help. Maybe they just don't want other people to know or worry about what's going on with them. It's possible that they were maybe even conned out of giving up their own soul and are now trying to find a way to get it back. Who's to say? That would be me purely speculating. We don't really have enough information on that whole thing to really know what's up with that. Point is, Chris sees himself in Spamton, and when Spamton just completely breaks, Chris sees that Spamton has failed in trying to achieve freedom. And if Spamton did all of this and still failed to accomplish his goals, then what are the chances that they ever will? So discarded objects and freedom. The latter has a lot more to it than that, of course. It also extends to the Secret Bosses having knowledge of the world around them. But these are the things I'm certain will recur in future Secret Bosses, because they tie into the game's main themes and the struggles of our protagonist. I feel like this next one might be obvious, but I figured I'd mention it anyway. The next Secret Boss will probably have another Shadow Crystal, because Shame alludes to the fact that we may find more. They also seem to be a part of the issues Jevil and Spamton were having. I feel like the Shadow Crystals are responsible for Jevil and Spamton learning things they shouldn't have. And said Shadow Crystals come from, well, you already know. So to recap, the Secret Bosses need to be brought to life through things that are typically discarded or have been discarded in the past. They need to be tied to the themes of freedom and free will, and they need to have a Shadow Crystal, which probably plays into how they know about their own existence. But here's the thing that people seem to forget. Jevil and Spamton are discarded items who have opinions on freedom and both have Shadow Crystals with knowledge about their own reality, but they are also actually connected to the themes of the Dark World. This is something I've seen a lot of people forget when making Secret Boss takes. The Chapter 1 Dark World was focused on tabletop games, and Jevil was the playing card, the Joker card. The Chapter 2 Dark World was focused on the internet and technology. Spamton was spam mail, meaning that whoever the Secret Boss is must be tied to the themes we listed above and tied to the actual theme of the chapter. Now we know that Chapter 3 Dark World is TV based. This is basically confirmation at this point. Chris turned on the TV when they created the Dark World at the end of Chapter 2. In addition to that, in the Damn Utena webpage, Spamton says this: That damn boob tube. You're the one that should be having a refreshing night's sleep in the recycling bin. Everything is his. Everything is his fault. Everyone is going to pay. Everyone is going to pay 5 easy payments of $9.99 until they're all in the disposable area, begging for my flaw. Everyone except Mike. BoobTube is just another way of saying TV. And considering that Spampton blames Tena for everything that has gone wrong in his life and then makes the effort to exclude Mike, that means when Spampton says, "Don't believe anything you see on TV, that man's a criminal," he was actually referring to Tena. All those things point towards the TV darkener we see at the end of Chapter 2 being Tena. Not to mention there's a room in Chapter 3 called the Green Room. A green room, by definition, is a room in a theater or studio in which performers can relax when they are not performing. There was also that concept art of Chris standing alone on some sort of stage with some name next to them that is cut off but begins with T, most likely being Tena. And it all highlights that Tena is the main boss of Chapter 3, not Mike. In fact, Spampton seems to think of Mike fondly. If you choose to beat Spampton with violence, he will have a line that reads, "Are you getting all this, Mike? I'm finally gonna be a big shot." Almost as if Spampton wants Mike to be proud of him. But that also sounds like Mike used to record Spampton. This isn't the only evidence though. Spampton claims he doesn't need him anymore, but seemingly misses him. We don't need Mike. Mike. This repeat of the name, especially given the way Spampton looks when he says it, all depressed and everything, kinda sounds like he's reminiscent and sad about something related to Mike. The line about not believing anything you see on TV also does imply that Tena was spreading misinfo about Mike. Tena sent his crew after Mike or to search for info about him, and Spampton is aware of this and tries to protect him, which we know based on this line of dialogue. "Are you one of that Kakato's crew? You guys know nothing about Mike. Nothing, and that's the way it's gonna stay. You leave him out of this." It's kind of clear that there will be some overarching theme of the Mafia based on what we see in the Spampton sweepstakes. The Fun Gang's outfits, the Shadow Guys, and Spampton treating Tena and his crew like they are the literal mob. Mike seems to be the only person that Spampton looked back on fondly. But how is any of this Mike stuff relevant though? Well, I believe that Mike is actually going to be the secret boss of Deltarune Chapter 3. I know I have heard some people say that this isn't in the nature of Deltarune's writing to foreshadow a secret boss because that defeats the point of them being secret. However, the community are the only ones that have been calling them secret bosses. Additionally, while Jevil is kind of hidden, Spampton is very much not hidden. Deltarune is intended for people that have played Undertale. Toby said that himself. Most people that played it will play Deltarune in the same way they played the Pacifist run in Undertale because Undertale rewards you for getting to the game without fighting. And when you do that in Deltarune, specifically in the battle with Spampton, you basically unlock the rest of his quest that leads you to fighting his Neoform. And Spampton literally walks you through the steps that lead you to that encounter. It's hard to even argue that Spampton is a secret boss when the dude literally holds your hand through the entire side quest. So I absolutely do believe that it is in Deltarune's nature to foreshadow the secret boss. I think it's more of a subversion of what we expected anyways. We expect the secret boss to foreshadow the main boss after Chapter 2, because Jevil foreshadowed Queen, but instead they foreshadowed the secret boss. But since we do know that Spampton was most likely talking about Tena when he calls the man on TV a criminal, there's two possibilities. Either Mike isn't the secret boss, or Spampton's just foreshadowing the main boss as well as the secret boss. Now my theory that I have for who the secret boss is doesn't have to be Mike. It doesn't. My theory doesn't hinge on it being Mike. I just think it strengthens the story a bit. So even if Spampton isn't foreshadowing the secret boss, and even if Mike isn't the secret boss, my theory can still work. So I'm not hinging my whole theory on this like one small little reference of the character Mike, who at the very least is just going to be important. But importance doesn't relate to being a secret boss. Like Mike could just be a character we meet in Chapter 3, locked away somewhere. We don't really know as of yet. There is one final thing we have to mention about Tena, for some things that I'm going to be mentioned later to make sense. They were someone Spampton worked with in the past, during his Big Shot days. As Spampton says, we don't need easels or CRTs. There's also the line that says he started bragging about TV deals, another association with TV. Now it's time to tie all this together. How do Spampton, Mike, and Tena relate to each other? Well, many assumed that the mysterious person that helped Spamton rise to power had to be Gaster, largely due to the garbage noise heard at the end of Spamton's downfall by one of the Addisons. However, looking at the way the events play out, this doesn't make sense. If Gaster was the one who abandoned Spamton in the first place, why would he call back one last time? More importantly, why would Spamton trust or even listen to the call after being betrayed? Gaster's way of going about things doesn't seem to fit with the idea of helping Spamton rise to fame, only to let him fall. The extra step of success before his downfall seems completely unnecessary, considering Spamton was already desperate before his rise. This strongly suggests that the person who initially helped Spamton and the final garbage noise caller were two entirely different individuals. And when we consider who Spamton holds the most resentment towards, the answer becomes clear. Tenna. He despises Tenna even more than Swatch or Queen, who are from his own world. If Spamton views Tenna as a criminal and blames him for everything that went wrong in his life, then it's likely because Tenna was directly responsible. This leads to the idea that Tenna himself was the one who helped Spamton rise to fame, or simply just played a very large role in his success, who was securing those TV deals and commercials for Spamton, while Gaster was just the one who made the final call that led to his crack insanity. His deep hatred for Tenna would make perfect sense if he was betrayed, possibly discarded after being used. If Tenna set him up for success only to pull the rug out from under him, then Spamton's belief that Tenna is responsible for everything that happened to him in his life is completely justified. To me, Tenna is most likely a TV producer, a ruthless businessman searching for new stars, which aligns with his nature as a television. People are broadcasted on him. He finds people to broadcast. Spamton's rise to fame has always been a vague part of his backstory, so it makes sense that Tenna, an even more mysterious figure, would be directly tied to it. Looking at real-world parallels, this theory fits neatly with the history of entertainment. In the 1990s, television was still the dominant form of media, and the internet was still in its infancy. More people would have seen Spamton's advertisements on TV rather than online, reinforcing the idea that Tenna was the key figure, or a key figure, in his rise. However, things have since reversed, with the internet taking over as the main platform for content. This shift could tie to Tenna's own goals and motivations, in ways we have yet to see yet. If Tenna, as a living television, played a role in Spamton's rise to fame, it could have been through these various signals, whether it was through TV, radio transmissions, or an early form of digital communication. This connection between Spamton and Tenna might have been forged through the tech at the time, ultimately leading to Spamton's downfall when Tenna decided to cut him off. And it's possible that through this, Spamton met Mike, or it's possible that Mike was the one that connected to Spamton and put Spamton in touch with Tenna before Mike was dealt with by Tenna. That doesn't really contradict what I said earlier, because Spamton was still beginning to Tenna just through a third party. I see Tenna as a very scummy person, obviously. I feel like they will be the personification of Hollywood itself. They basically look for new stars to fill time slots and cast them aside when they stop making him money or valuing in any way at all to Tenna. Which brings me to Mike. The terms used in the game about the person that helped Spamton get big are that this person disappeared, not abandoned Spamton or left. That is very important. It's why I alluded to the fact that it's possible Mike got in touch with Spamton and then put Spamton in touch with Tenna. Tenna seemingly wants nothing to do with Mike, as they spread misinfo about him and sent their crew to hunt for him. So maybe there was some sort of falling out between the two, and since Mike would have been the person responsible for Spamton's success, Spamton got caught in the middle of that, which leads me finally to be able to talk about my idea for the secret boss. Let me remind you what the rules are. They need to be discarded. They need to be associated with freedom. They need to have a shadow crystal and be aware of their own existence. And they need to fit with the theme of the chapter. Now, you could argue the theme of the chapter is television, but I'd argue that's just entertainment, because it's not really like Spamton was a TV star. He just ran commercials. So I feel like it's safe to broaden the scope a bit, since it doesn't have to just be TV themed. Like the Cyberworld, Dark World, was mostly focused on the internet, but that's not the only thing that it focused on. It focused on games and just technology in general. So each chapter can definitely have more than one theme. TV can just be the main one that we experience. Anyhow, so all the items you'd expect to be the secret boss in Chris's house do not fit with these rules. There's only one thing that covers all the themes that I can think of anyway. The flowers only fall under the discarded rule. The game console in Chris's room, I mean, half of Chapter 2, like I literally just said, was centered in the games. I don't really foresee Chapter 3 having much to do with that theme at all. I will just cut to the chase. I believe we haven't seen the item yet. I believe whatever form the secret boss takes is something that's locked up in Torio's room. With all that being said, I believe that the Deltarune Chapter 3 secret boss will be none other than some form of radio, which means there would be a radio in the light world. I'm not entirely sure why Torio would have a radio in her room, but we can focus on that another time. Because I really don't have an explanation for that. It's a small hole in an otherwise solid theory that I believe. I mean, Asgore was a police officer, so maybe he just had a fucking radio in his house. I don't know. And Torio just kept it for some reason. I don't know. We'll focus on another time. I believe that not only is the secret boss some type of radio, but they were probably a radio host, if I had to be super specific. I believe this radio host was none other than Spamton's good friend Mike. Toby is no stranger to pulling from other sources of media that aren't games for his stories. Half of Spamton's character revolves around the Soto commercial from the 90s, and Queen's design is based on the Xenomorph. And this extends to him being inspired by music as well. Hopes and Dreams was inspired by the band, I'm gonna be real, I have it written in my script, I can't pronounce it, so we're just gonna have it appear on screen. Songs themselves are a form of storytelling, so it wouldn't surprise me if Toby was inspired enough to center a story around it. You get the point. What does this have to do with anything? Well, I believe the story of Tenna and Mike specifically was inspired by the song Video Killed the Radio Star by the Bugles. The premise of Video Killed the Radio Star is just explaining what happened between the radio and the television, and how television revolutionized entertainment as we know it, as the radio started becoming more irrelevant. In essence, the song is a nostalgic lament for the golden age of radio. It's a reflection on how technology transforms and erases what came before. The song mourns the loss of a time when families gathered around the radio, their imaginations painting vivid pictures from nothing but the voices and sound. The transition to television and later the music era of MTV, the latter beginning in the 80s and 90s by the way, stripped away the creative freedom, replacing it with dazzling visuals that left little room for the mind to wander. The song reflects this loss not only through its lyrics but also in the sound, with the singer's voice filtered to mimic the gramophone era crooners, invoking a world that has long since faded away. The name of the song, Video Killed the Radio Star, to me is meant to capture how many radio icons, skilled in voice but not necessarily appearance, failed to transition to television. The song has a very prevalent theme of replacement, with TV replacing radio, which I can tie back into Deltarune, as I feel like Mike will be a former radio host that was cast aside when Tenna came in and took over, which fits with the rules that I established earlier and the themes of the game perfectly. When television was introduced, radio became obsolete and faded into obscurity, almost like it was discarded, which fits with our current secret bosses, Jevil and Spamton, who are both based on items that are typically discarded. Now, it doesn't have to be a radio, like I saw, but there's another secret boss idea that fits with this theme of being discarded as well, which is like they're the personification of a canceled TV show, which is a cool idea, and it's one of my favorite theories for Deltarune. But the reason I went with the radio route is because TV currently, in our modern age, is in a very similar position that the TV put radio in when the TV was introduced. Television is slowly fading into obscurity as the internet and computers take over. So I think it would be nice for Tenna to be obsessed with trying to prevent what he did to Mike. He doesn't want to end up like Mike. That could be a very interesting and different, that could be a very interesting way of tackling Tenna's character. It would make him different from King and Queen, who just wants to remain relevant for as long as possible, and that's his entire goal in life. Now, I mentioned earlier as my second rule that they had to have some sort of opinion on freedom. Now, from this point onward, we will have to speculate a little bit because we literally have nothing to go off of here. we can just assume that they will have a different opinion on freedom compared to Sans, Jevil, Spamton, and Sham, to make them stand out, to make them a different character than those four. And they all have very different opinions on the idea of freedom. But as a refresher, Jevil feels like nothing matters, which liberates him to do anything. Spamton wants to reach heaven so he can finally actually be free, and Sham doesn't really care about anything because it's all meaningless in the end. I feel like the secret boss will obviously be different from these three. In my opinion, is that the secret boss will be kind of similar to Spamton, kind of in the way Jevil is similar to Sans. They are two sides of the same coin. Nothing matters, so Sans doesn't try. Nothing matters, so Jevil can do anything. I feel like Mike will be similar to Spamton in the way that he's seen heaven. He wants to reach it, and maybe has even tried to reach it, but fails every time. Spamton was desperate in his search to reach heaven, while this Mike character, I feel like, will be more hopeful. And it could be very interesting because we haven't really seen a positive take on these characters knowing about their existence within the video game. I feel like we should have at least seen someone that has a positive outlook on that life. Sans, Sham, Jevil, and Spamton are all the negative sides of them having knowledge of their own existence. I feel like it would be nice if we had a more positive character for a change. Doesn't mean they have to be a good person. Listen, I'm arguing for them to be the secret boss. But their outlook on life can still be very cheerful and hopeful. That one day they will be able to reach heaven. It might not be tomorrow, it might not be the day after, but one day they just might. I think it could inadvertently add more depth to Spamton's character, because maybe Spamton assumed that Mike was dead. Maybe there was a part of Spamton that wanted to reach heaven for Mike. Not saying Spamton is some selfless hero or a good person at all. I just feel like that could be a nice addition to his character, which does play into the next thing. Mike will obviously have a shadow crystal, since, like I said earlier, that most likely plays into these characters learning of the nature within a game. This interpretation of Mike and their outlook on the world around them is actually based on the Twilight Zone theory, which basically says that an episode of the Twilight Zone parallels the events of Deltarune. I mean, one of the characters is a clown who believes they are in hell and isn't interested in escaping, and the other is a hobo that is desperate to escape. Who do those people sound like? Not to mention, the Twilight Zone theme does sound similar to Gaster's. It really wouldn't surprise me if Toby was inspired by the Twilight Zone. Those characters are all stuck in a place that's called the Pit of Darkness, where they try to reach for the heavens above. I won't go into the full thing, but there is a great video that explains these points better than I ever could. And lastly, the radio fits with the theme of entertainment. I feel like Mike will be a radio host that was replaced when Tenna took over. So I imagine the TV Dark World was originally run by Mike, but then Tenna took over at some point and got Mike booted, maybe even tried to kill him. Maybe Mike wasn't booted instantly. Could have been a slow thing, just because he still has to meet Spamton at some point in this interpretation of the secret boss. It's not like TVs instantly replaced the radio when they were introduced. It was a slow, gradual thing that happened over many years. I could totally see this being a thing where Tenna came in and slowly took over the world right under Mike's nose, and before Mike realized this fact, he was booted. And because Mike was booted, Spamton lost his one in to the industry and was cast aside by Tenna. And then shortly after, he got the phone call from Gaster and was never the same person again. I suspect Tenna will also be the sort of mob boss. I mean, he did send people to probably kill Mike. So I imagine Mike was going to be killed, and he escaped. And Spamton just assumed the worst. We don't really know for sure if Mike is actually fully gone or not. That is the best way that I could put it. That doesn't really contradict anything that I've stated before. It allows Spamton and Mike to still meet while keeping the whole radio thing. It's important to note that Mike doesn't necessarily have to be the secret boss, which I alluded to earlier. Mike will undoubtedly be an important figure, regardless of his stature as the secret boss. But my idea for a radio host that was replaced by Tenna could still very much happen. And I still think it makes a lot of sense. But it doesn't have to be Mike. I connected it to Mike because I think it has a strong chance of being Mike. I think it might even make the story stronger, but it doesn't have to be him. As simple as a radio host darkener that used to rule the land with an iron fist, but Tenna came into the picture and took over. Then sometime later they learned of their true reality of their world. Perhaps it even happened during their reign, and this would allow Tenna to take over. It's hard to say, but at some point they learned of their true nature within the game and made the effort to reach heaven. Not out of desperation or sadness, but out of hope. They hope to reach heaven, and no matter how many times they fall down, they will still get back up. Disappointed they haven't reached heaven today, but hopeful they might reach it tomorrow. Then enter Chris, who they see as their key to freedom, just like Jevil and Spamton. This being repetitive really depends on how Toby handles it. You can have similar things in a story, but the execution can be totally different, so it doesn't feel the same. I feel like the way they approach Chris might be more gentle and soft compared to the other. I feel like they might try to appear more normal, more friendly compared to Jevil and Spamton, trying to butter them up before eventually stabbing them in the back. Jevil and Spamton are very erratic characters. I don't really see this next secret boss being anything like that. I actually think they will be much closer to Sham or Sans, but both of them aren't really interested in fleeing anymore. This person is, and they hope one day they might be able to finally get free. They remain a level head when trying to gain freedom, calm and collected, and just try again if they fail. That's who I believe the secret boss will be in essence, which makes them different enough from Spamton, because unlike Spamton, this person doesn't stop in their pursuit. They also aren't a desperate gremlin, groveling at the feet of others to try and get by. They will keep trying, keep hoping for a day where they can reach the heavens above. So I wouldn't be surprised if you run into a character who doesn't feel like Jevil and Spamton at all, doesn't mention the word freedom at all, and it's just an act, holding their cards close to their chests, playing this more technically to try and achieve their goal. Moreover, whether this be Mike or some other character that we've never heard of before, I don't think their character is defined by their opinion on freedom. I could see how you can make that argument for Jevil, even if I don't personally agree with it. You could still make that argument, but you can't make the same argument for Spamton. There's far more to his character than just his lust for freedom. I mean, that's very evident here since that part of Spamton's character hasn't been super important to this discussion, despite Spamton being very integral to it. I feel like in the same way the lyrics of Video Killed the Radio Star look back nostalgically on that era, I feel like the same will be for the actual radio host. I don't want to say that they've accepted that their time has passed, but maybe that's it. Maybe it's as simple as that. Maybe they have accepted that TV is the golden age now, which would contrast Tenna perfectly, who realizes that the internet and computers are taking over but doesn't want to accept that. Maybe their goal is to reach heaven. Maybe their goal to reach heaven is something that's less sinister. Like perhaps radio is outdated in their world, but maybe there's another world out there, like the heavens above, where it's not outdated. You see what I'm trying to say here? Essentially, they look back on their days in the dark world with fondness, but are eager to move on and beyond, making them a very different character for Jevil and Spamton, which could play into why they search for freedom. Maybe their ambitions, their creativity is hampered within their realm. Their genre is obsolete, and they have to live with that. And so maybe that's why they want to reach heaven and search for a world where this isn't the case. Also, it's likely that Mike is a wanted man in his dark worlds. Maybe he just wants to escape heaven so that he could creatively express himself freely without Tenna looking over his neck, that sort of thing. But this actually perfectly relates to Chris, but not in the same way you were thinking. In the Spamton sweepstakes, we learned that Chris would often go over to Noelle's house just to play the piano because they didn't have one at home. And when he tried to play the piano in the hospital, Susie makes some remark about how she thought Chris might actually be good when the noise sounds horrible, which makes Chris rightfully angry. It's clear Chris has a passion for piano, and as controlling them is removing their ability to express themselves creatively. So it's very similar and is a nice little parallel. Not as strong as the one between Chris and Spampton, but there still is one here, and it relates to the TV Dark World and entertainment theme of that Dark World. In this case, both aren't able to express themselves creatively, something that they do yearn for. It's just in different contexts. One's method of being creative is an obsolete art form, while the other is being controlled by a being from another universe, removing their ability to play the piano, their passion. So it doesn't have to be Mike. The idea works just fine without Mike. I just wouldn't be surprised if it is him, and I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't him. I could go either way. So even if the secret boss isn't Mike, I still think the general idea could still happen because it fits with the rules that we established earlier. I just think it'd be interesting for us to have an antagonist that was in a similar boat to Jekyll and Spampton, but didn't really have this sort of mental fracture and didn't become completely insane. Maybe there is some level of insanity, but it's not like to the extreme that it is with Jekyll and Spampton. If anything, it just provides them with a sense of hope, a way for them to escape their own obscurity. I'm not entirely sure if this means anything, but I figured I'd mention it anyway. The Green Room. I'm not entirely sure if this means anything, but the Green Room could suggest this, because the doors on the opposite ends of the room are shaped like M's, and everything TV related in that room could have been placed there after the fact. I could be reading too much into this, of course, but the Green Room is one of those rooms that looks very intentionally designed, because it mirrors Chris and Azrael's room. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the doors might have been thought out too, assuming that this is true, of course. But again, it could just be pure coincidence, and that means nothing. There is another theory that I actually had, which actually has no basis or connection to the themes, that I will say right now, and that this radio host is able to mimic the speech patterns of other characters to trick and lock you into a false sense of security. I think it could be interesting for a character like that to exist, and basically say some awful things to other characters. Like imagine this radio host talking in Toriel's voice to Chris and saying some ugly things like that. That could go hard, bro. But just imagine that with other characters, like maybe the radio host talks with Novelle's voice and says some awful things about Susie, that sort of thing. Just tearing out the scars of their heart. I think that's ripe with potential. I think it's also very likely that if the secret bosses continue the trend of different soul modes, we literally have one example of this, but if they do, I have a feeling that the secret boss of chapter 3 will use the green soul mode. Now this is not based in any reverse order or anything like that, it's just tied to my theory of the secret boss being a radio host. Radio waves can be reflected and refracted to change direction. So what if this fight could be similar to Axis' fight from Undertow Yellow, where you have to hit the waves back at the secret boss? There's a few more lines of the song Video Killed the Radio Star that I want to discuss before signing off. Pictures came and broke your heart. By far one of my favorite lines from the song. It highlights the fact that visual media made radio stars less relevant as the audience now favored musicians who not only sounded good but also looked appealing on screen, which I think could very easily apply to this Radio Darkener, or just Mike if it does happen to be him. Tenna just made the radio less relevant. And maybe the world in the Dark World became worse off as a result of that. We can't rewind, we've gone too far. This line indicates that there's no turning back. Technology progression is irreversible, and the world has moved on from the radio era, just like they moved on from the radio host. You are a radio star. A nostalgic acknowledgement of the past and a farewell to the old era. I wouldn't be surprised if this line is referenced in chapter 3 as the secret boss is getting beat. This whole video I've been referring to Mike and the secret boss as a radio host. However, that again doesn't necessarily have to be the case for what we're going with. They could just be an actor that was prominent on radio, and it kind of does fit a little bit better with the song, in fact, actually. And it does fit better with a TV Dark World, since I imagine a big part of that will be actors. I'm only a little hesitant on it due to the fact that I'm not entirely sure how you would go about imagining a voice actor in a game like this, So I lean a bit more into the radio host thing regardless of who the secret boss actually is. Not to mention the host can very much be a star, which is often the case in game shows. So this still very much can apply. Now I want to mention something before signing off. It seems that the secret bosses always seem to have a connection to each other. Like if we assume Mike is the secret boss, which I'm still 50-50 on, then it's possible that each secret boss will have a connective tissue to each other. Shovel to Spamton, these two don't like each other, and Spamton to Mike, and possibly Mike to the Chapter 4 secret boss. Now you might think we can't make any assumption on the Chapter 4 secret boss, and you're right, we can't, or at least not in any confidence. But if we assume Mike is a radio or the secret boss is a radio, then we can make a pretty decent guess on who the Chapter 4 secret boss actually is. And I believe they will be a musician. I am more inclined to the belief of a rock star. And the reason I believe this is around the time the radio was relevant, around the 60s, rock music was actually considered the devil's music. And you, of course, play music over the radio. Now, why do I bring up the devil? Well, it's highly likely that the Chapter 4 Dark World will take place in the church. We know Rudy mentioned something along the lines of being well enough to go to church tomorrow. We know there's no school tomorrow. We have seen concept art of Caddy or Susie, I can't remember which one it is, but we've seen them in concept art scooping up some red fruit punch. In Chapter 1, we can speak to Alvin, where we can basically ask him about fruit punch, in which he will suggest that if Chris wants some so bad, they should stop by for a service. In that same concept art, there's also a drawing of Noelle sitting politely, which does fit with a church setting, so we can assume it's all connected. And not to mention, in one of the newsletters, we can see a darkener based on some sort of cup you'd use for punch. With that being said, it's very obvious that Chapter 4 will take place in a church dark world with all like the setup in the game and just like little nuggets of info we have gotten over the last 4 years. But I don't really have too much else to say on that, like on the themes of the chapter or whatever, because I'm not entirely sure how heavy Toby will be with religion. I just do think there will be devil symbolism, since that is common in religion. And what other way to make this fun than to have the secret boss be some sort of failed rock star that can make your ears bleed? The difference between this secret boss is that they don't care about reaching heaven, being in complete and utter denial about the information the Shadow Crystals gave them, and just wants to play their sick ass guitar, also based on Twilight Zone theory. They could also have this sort of like this punk attitude, which I just hate that terminology, but whatever. But that's what I'm imagining. I imagine this boss would actually be more of a mirror to Susie more than anything else. Maybe a manifestation of everything she could have been had she not befriended Chris. So probably an evil piece of garbage, most likely. She'd be very similar to Susie in that regard, a very mean and rude person who doesn't let anyone in and only cares about her music. Obviously that part's not associated with Susie, I'm just saying like her attitude would be more similar to Susie. And her music is the only way that brings her some semblance of joy. I feel like this character would actually be a girl. Like if Mike is the secret boss to Chapter 3, then I could see this character being a female, since neither of the secret bosses we have so far are female, and Mike's a guy's name. But if Mike isn't the Chapter 3 secret boss, then it wouldn't surprise me if they are female. Trust me, one of these secret bosses will be female. It's just a toss-up of who it is. God help us all. I do imagine the soul mode of this boss would be the blue soul, because I imagine the sonic waves keeping you from floating in the battle box. Not sure what item this would be based off of. This theory is really just tagged at the end because I'm not sure how to make a whole video, since we have so little information on Chapter 4. But those are my predictions for the two secret bosses. A radio host replaced by TV, and a failed rock star that doesn't care about anything but playing their instrument and vibing. You know, a part of the song video Kill the Radio Stars, looking back on the glory days, looking back on the old days, the days of radio with nostalgia, and I mean that theme does seem to be present in certain characters in Deltarune, specifically Noelle, who misses the days of exploring the forest with Azzy, Chris, and Des. So that theme of nostalgia actually does have some merit with his theory. This whole idea just works really well with the themes of the secret bosses, in my opinion. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did or agree with anything I had to say, please leave a like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. You can always change your mind anytime you like. That's all for me. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Until we meet again, don't forget to kill your TV. Another topic I want to address is the nature of dark worlds themselves. They are inherently tied to dreams, despite everything that happens in them, at least to Lightner's, being real. Which of course we know, because if you beat Burley through violence in any of his fights, his arm will be broken, and if you decide to Snowgrave, he will be having a refreshing night's sleep. Their connection and association with dreams, and by proxy, sleep, is evident in a few different places and important to this discussion. In the prophecy we hear from Rouse, he states this: it was a legend of light and dark. It was a legend of hopes and dreams. In essence, these lines are the same. Light and dark are just switched with hopes and dreams. Hope is usually associated with light, while dark is associated with dreams. Darkness and dreams are connected because you usually only sleep when it's dark out. Moreover, at the end of both chapters 1 and 2, Susie, Burley, and Noelle all assume what they must have experienced had to have been a dream. And the spikes for Burley and Noelle, when their heads are on the table, are referred to as sleeping. So I believe that closing a dark fountain and returning to the light world is akin to waking up from a dream. In addition to that, you can skip both light world sections at the start of the game by interacting with Chris's bed by simply going back to sleep. And it's a very clear choice to have the text say when you do this, a dark world could be a metaphor for dreams, or they could simply just be dreams brought to life, and in a way, that's what they are. According to Queen, determination is the key factor to create fountains. Now bear with me. If we look at the Astral fight in Undertale, we can look at the text that reads when you check the last dream item, and when you use it, it will say, "Through determination, the dreams come true." Now, it's hard to say how reliable this information from Undertale really is, since Toby did make a point to say that these are different games with different worlds and might even have different rules. But from what we have seen, determination does seem to function more or less the same as it does in Undertale, even being able to bring inanimate objects to life. In both Undertale and Deltarune, it appears determination has the power to manifest dreams into reality. These really aren't the only connections to dreams, though. The Rudin in front of the party dojo in Castletown, I don't remember if it's like at the start or end of chapter 2, but he has a line that describes Castletown as a dream that grows with love and care. Noelle is also basically led to believe that everything that happened in chapter 2 was nothing more than a dream. But on top of that, near the end of the weird route, Susie says to Queen that it's time for Noelle to wake up, in which Queen says something along the lines of they need to let her sleep and fall into a darker dream, implying the world they are already in is a dream. During Queen's boss fight, she literally says that they can create the world of their dreams. You get the point. They are tied to dreams in both a literal and metaphorical sense. Why do I even bring this up? Well, dreams have symbolism. Well, they can at least. And while the radio might not symbolize much in the real world, from the research that I've done, it has a lot of symbolism in dreams and ties perfectly into everything going on with our protagonist in Deltarune, which is why it's important for me to bring up. Keep in mind though, dreams are very weird, for lack of a better term. And what I mean by this is that this is not the correct interpretation of what radio means in dreams. It might mean something different to you, or it might mean nothing at all. This is just what happens to be the most common interpretation of radios and dreams that I could find, and relates to Deltarune pretty well. So don't take what I'm saying as like gospel or as like the only way for you to interpret dreams. They're very malleable and they're very abstract. They can mean many different things across many different people. This is more just a matter of opinion really, but it's just very common ones, and there is some research behind it. But the most common way is not the correct way, if what I'm saying, if that makes sense. But moving on. Now on to what radios have the ability to symbolize. The common through line through the many different interpretations of radio is that of communication. And there are two key things that this relates to in Deltarune. One of them is that of one-sided communication. Listening to someone that doesn't listen to you, which relates to Chris in two different ways. Obviously, they are controlled by us and have the option to make Chris say or do things that we know they wouldn't have wanted to do. Like at the end of Deltarune Chapter 2, when Susie asks Chris who they'd rather go to the festival with. If we pick anything other than Susie, Chris will sound confused. Or, at the start of Chapter 2, if we say that our sleep quality decreased by Susie being our partner, when we interact with Alphys, she will mention Chris said that with no negative intonation at all. Or how about the route where we force Chris to manipulate their best friend into committing mass murder? Chris is forced to listen to us. They are forced to do what we say. This can also relate to Chris's relationship with Toriel. Essentially, what I mean by this is that Chris isn't just controlled by us, they are controlled by their own mother as well, who seems very, very overprotective of Chris, and is very much babying them. Like at the start of the game, after Toriel and Chris arrive at school, Toriel decides that she needs to hold Chris's hand as they walk inside, as if they aren't literally a teenager most likely, and they are very much capable of walking on their own. And if you walk slowly after you exit the classroom with Susie to get the chalk, Susie will make a remark that Chris isn't used to walking without their mother holding their hand. And yeah, it could just be Susie being mean like she is at the start of Chapter 1, but it really wouldn't surprise me if this is just how Toriel is. And I want to touch back on the car thing for a brief moment. It is kind of funny that no one else in town seems to drive their kids to school. It appears to just be Toriel, and the school is a very short distance away. She easily could have let Chris walk, like she does at the end of Chapter 1 for some reason, but she makes the choice not to. And with that in mind, at the start of Chapter 1, when Chris and Toriel arrive at school, it appears that Chris is holding their head down, like their sprite changes and everything. I don't know if that means anything, but it looks like they're doing so in shame when Toriel walks them inside. They don't even hug Toriel back when she hugs them, which to me, personally, makes me think that Chris resents the fact that Toriel isn't giving them much freedom at all. Not saying Chris hates Toriel. I hate when people try to make that argument, but I'm just saying that Chris doesn't like the restrictions that they have that Toriel is giving them. They do have some freedom, but it's not a lot. And not to mention, like I said earlier, Chris is most likely depressed. And I'm not sure whether or not Toriel is aware of this. She probably isn't, but regardless of if she is or isn't, it's possible that she might be enabling it. See, the way I see it, Chris is depressed that Azriel left, but that isn't the entire story. Another factor is their parents' divorce. Azriel leaving and their parents' divorce was literally the entire foundation of their life, and when that all went away, their whole world came crashing to the ground. And obviously, Toriel has a very big disdain for Asgore for whatever reason that may be. So it's likely that Chris isn't able to see their father as much as they'd like, because Toriel doesn't seem to like him and might not want Chris to spend time with him, which we can most likely extrapolate from the scene at the end of Deltarune Chapter 2 in Sansa's shop. Asgore tells Toriel to say hi to Chris for him, and Toriel didn't even mention Asgore's name in the final scene. It's obvious Chris misses the way their life was before and desperately clings on to hope things might be able to go back to the way they were. It might even play into the reason Chris created the Chapter 3 Dark Road at the end of Chapter 2, so they might be able to fix their life in some way, shape, or form. Not understanding that's not how it works. Things will never be able to go back to how they were pre-divorce or pre-Azriel life. Like, it's impossible. Time marches forward. There's no fixing what's already broken, but they can mend their relationship. Like, Toriel and Asgore will never get back together, but that doesn't mean Toriel and Asgore can't repair their relationship in some way, shape, or form. Chris is depressed, and it's possible that Toriel is enabling it. Not saying that she doesn't care. I would never make that argument in 10 million years, but she just doesn't do enough about it. Toriel has always struck me as a character that thought love was the only thing that was needed for a healthy relationship. Obviously, that isn't true. As I stated earlier, Chris's side of the room is a barren wasteland, something Toriel seems to just accept and has Chris get up for school. Chris doesn't talk to anyone, which we can infer based on what Noelle says about it being strange Chris doesn't talk to anyone. They keep to themselves and don't even seem to care that Susie bullies them, but Toriel cares. But her inaction is just making everything worse, believing all they have to do is love Chris for things to get better, while she lets them sleep in a bare bones wasteland festering in their own misery, instead of making an effort to help, like, having the actual difficult conversations, or encouraging Chris to be more active. But moreover, I don't think it helps that she just throws the flowers that Chris gives her from Asgore in the trash. That probably doesn't make Chris's life any better. What I'm trying to say is Toriel is very controlling over Chris and doesn't really listen to them. And is probably making their situation worse without even realizing it, unfortunately. I feel like Toriel's arc in Chapter 3 will be multi-layered. I feel like that she might learn to give Chris more freedom, learning that they can take care of themselves through the Dark World adventures. But I also feel like another aspect of it will be forgiving Asgore for whatever he did wrong in the past. I believe that it's possible that Queen was meant to be a parallel to Noelle and Berdly's own mother. Kind of similar to how King is kind of a parallel to Sooty in a way, because they both have that similar line about quiet people pissing them off. King is very obviously a parallel of what Susie could have become if she continued down the path she was going down. So I think it's very likely that Tenna, who is all but confirmed to be the main antagonist, is meant to be a parallel towards Asgore in some way, shape, or form. I think that Chapter 3 Dark Road is a needed step into making Chris's life better. And even Toriel's, because Toriel will learn that Chris can take care of themselves. And it might lead to her forgiving Asgore and allowing him entry back into their lives. It could also lead to Toriel learning that her inaction over what was going on with Chris, and her treating like Asgore like he's the spawn of Satan, was only making Chris's life worse. And might be more open to listening to them going forward. Listen, like a radio. I'm sorry, I just needed a good way to segue back into the radio thing. Radios and dreams can symbolize one-sided communication. That was the whole point, and that's why I needed to mention all of what I mentioned above. It's represented in Chris's relationship with the player and the relationship with Toriel. I mentioned communication meant two things earlier. This was the first one. The other one is about being more aware of your situation, because radios used to give the news before TV came in. And being aware over your current situation is a recurring theme within the Secret Bosses. Radios also represent a situation that you don't have any control over, and symbolizes a voice in your head that you keep listening to. I felt like this was all important to bring up because Dark Worlds are tied with dreams and such, and I felt like looking at what dreams have the ability to symbolize can craft a better picture of who the Secret Boss might be. Just want to say that I don't really have a need to be right. This was just a fun theory that I just wanted to put together to. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I don't really know how much merit it has. Maybe you guys can be the judges of that. I just thought it was a cool, fun little theory that I thought of that I think played to the themes of the game and all that stuff, and the themes of being discarded. Especially, I really love the idea, but I don't really care if it's wrong, because it just means I'll be surprised. You should want your theories to be wrong, actually. Because if they are wrong, then you can just use that for your own stuff and repurpose it for your own stuff. Which goes the same for original characters as well. It doesn't have to just be a Deltarune OC or a Deltarune original theory. If you're wrong, you can spin it off into your own thing. So it should be a good thing. You should actually want yourself to be wrong more than you want yourself to be right. At least that's my opinion on it. So if I'm right, awesome. If I'm wrong, awesome. It's a win-win for me. This is just my opinion. I think it's pretty cool. I like the idea of a radio host. I think it has some merit. I don't really know how strong it is. But that's why I'm making this video. I want to see what people's thoughts are on this idea that I've created. But I think that's all.